Thank you very much. So my name is Manori de Silva. I am a partner at Taylor English Law Firm here in Atlanta. We have about 250 attorneys across the US, and we are one of the many sponsors for today. Thank you very much to TiE for inviting me to moderate this panel. I'm very grateful and thankful to the opportunity. I am very honored to be here among these wonderful women, and I'm an immigrant myself 3 times over, so diversity, equity, and inclusion is very important to me. I specialize in employment law and helping businesses move to the US. And I just want to say that it was very good to read the bios of Sonjui and Noelle for today. So I'm going to introduce them, and first of all, we'll start with Noelle London, who hails from a place that I once lived in, as you can probably tell from my accent. So Noelle is the CEO and founder of Illoominus, and that's spelled Illoominus, and I encourage you to read her website, have a look at the website, because there's some very interesting statistics that she's got on the website about DE&I. Noelle founded her company to help other companies proactively manage their diversity commitments and retain and grow diverse employees into leadership positions. It's an Atlanta-based tech company that was born from seeing a need within the market for tracking and measurement for companies and to create accountability for people goals. Noelle has been working in this inclusion and innovation space for over a decade, even before we were really even talking about DE&I. So she was, a thought leader before it occurred. And for example, she was building programs for underrepresented students to connect with high-tech companies for the Atlanta Mayor's Office. And she started in this space after working with female founders in Nicaragua. That was her first job out of college. And now it's wonderful to see how it's come full circle for you, because Illoominus is a certified women-owned business. And she has a master's in global policy focused on economic development and technology from the University of Texas in Austin. So we'll be speaking to you in a bit, Noelle. And I'm very honored to have Sonjui Kumar here next to me as well. And Sonjui is the founding partner of KPPB Law, which is established in Atlanta, Georgia, in 2003. So congratulations on 20 years. That's fantastic. So KPPB Law has offices in Houston, Virginia, and New York. And Sonjui focuses on transactional law, and she has over 3 decades of representing companies from formation to exit. She's part of many diversity and inclusion organizations, including NAMWOLF, which is the National Association of Minority and Women-Owned Law Firms. Yes, such a thing does actually exist. And SABA and Georgia Indo-American Chamber and Leadership Atlanta. Sonjui's law firm is minority certified, and as part of her practice, she helps companies obtain minority and women-owned certification and the renewals of certification, which, as Chloe has mentioned, is very important. She went to the prestigious University of Connecticut for her law degree, and she speaks several languages. So we're going to get started in a minute. Also, I also ought to mention that she is a charter member of TiE Atlanta, so that's quite critical, yes. She has promoted DE&I in many areas for many years. So we're going to start in a minute with some questions, but I also wanted to just flag 2 things. As I was researching for today's session, I looked up the 2023 McKinsey report on diversity and inclusion. This is a bit of a sobering quote. It says, "It will take another 151 years to close the global economic gender gap at all levels." On a more positive note, though, the other day, New York just signed a law, the city of New York, I should say, not the state, the city of New York just signed a law making it illegal to discriminate against applicants and employees based on height or weight. So I just share that as part of what we see as a long climb, but nevertheless, we do see some progress because there are not very many states. I think it's only Maine that has a height discrimination law, but we do see some progress nevertheless. So before we just get onto the questions, I think it's useful, Sonjui, if you can give your definition of DE&I and what you understand by that.
Okay, so hello, TiE Atlanta. I know who you are. I have been a charter member for, more than a decade or so, and been part of the membership and involved here for a long time. So DE&I, not my definition, but a definition shared a while ago, because people do grapple with it. It can cover so many things. So the D part, diversity. So if you're having a dinner party, and you notice that you're always inviting the same people to your dinner party. Diversity is looking out into the world and inviting people to your dinner party that don't look like everybody else at your dinner party and that you don't normally have. So that's diversity. Equity is when they come into your house that you serve them the same food that you serve everybody else. So you don't invite these people that are different from everyone who you normally invite and then serve them something different. You invite them and you're going to engage in equity because you're going to serve them the same food. Inclusion is that you're going to go down to their part of the table, you're going to sit with them, you're going to try to understand them, and then you're going to bring other people over and include them in the conversation that you are having with others. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's kind of, it starts with diversity, goes to equity, and moves up the chain to inclusion. So when you hear companies, and especially larger companies, talking about, well, we really now are focused on inclusion, it's because people are at the table. They've walked in your door, and yeah, maybe you're paying them the same and treating them the same, but have you included them? Do they feel comfortable at your company? Are they part of your culture? And so that's D&I. It's not my definition, by the way. A very dear friend of mine, Natasha Reed Rice, who some of you might know, she's a preacher from Ebenezer and an amazing human. She shared that with me.
I think it's very memorable. It's a great way to remember that. So thank you for sharing that with us. So Noelle, if I may go to you and just ask you, why is diversity, in your opinion, important to business?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I've got to say I'm sitting here and this is such a full circle moment because as Chloe was mentioning, my role before going and leaving and starting my own company was I was actually at Accenture helping tech startups to navigate how to work with the Accentures of the world and work with the Accenture clients of the world. And so this is a really fun moment to be full circle, and now sitting next to Cecily, who's managing these minority and women-owned businesses because we are a certified woman-owned business. So it's a lot of fun to sit here. But I would say, in terms of Illoominus and what we do, I think that you mentioned a little bit Manori, but this was really born out of, I think, sitting in a place where you get so many market signals and seeing, as I was managing the technology landscape, and I was at a place like Accenture during 2020 after the murder of George Floyd, starting to have clients coming to me and asking me for help around, how do I solve this? How do I hold myself accountable? There was one story, and this is coming, I promise, back to why this is important. But there was one time where, somebody came to me and said, hey, my CEO just put out a press release and said, and this was about gender parity, and they said, we're gonna have gender parity by 2030. And then the people analytics team went back and said, we just ran the numbers, and for us to meet that goal, we have to hire 97% women, and we are a power tool company. So those are the kinds of things that we were seeing over and over again. And I've got to say, I know your question is, why is this important? I've got to say I'm probably not the right person to say why this is important. I'm kind of frustrated if I'm still having to tell you why this is important. I think that what I focus on is the how we do the work. And that's really what we focus on at Illoominus, is how do we help companies that care and want and see the future and see that this is important, how do we help them do that? And how do we help them do that through data? So that's kind of how all that full circle comes back. I think you mentioned some great quotes in McKinsey of why this is important for business. I love your metaphor because a lot of the other ones confuse me about dances and things like that, so I like yours better. But in terms of just the why this is important, I think, what I think about is I just think this is future-proofing your organization. When we look at the data, we bring in outside third-party data with company data so that we can really give you the context around what the data means within your organization. It's not just enough to say 16% of underrepresented women are leaving if you have no idea how to base that 16%. Is that good? Is that bad? So we bring in third-party data and we can say, how are you showing up relative to the market? And when we look at just basic US Census data, 48% of the US workforce is women. 60% of the US workforce is non-white, and that's today, and we're in 2023. So when you think about what we might think of the majority of leadership looking like today, that's gonna have to look very different in the future for you to be competitive as a company. And so when I think of why are we talking about this, why does it matter, it's the future of what our workforce looks like. And if you're not putting people in place today that actually come from different backgrounds and perspectives, you're not gonna have the leadership to get the best talent for tomorrow. And so that's why we think that it's important, and that's why we help companies start that journey now so that you can get the best talent and be ready for the future.
Thank you.
So 2 things, revenues, employees. It's like the 2 most important things to every company, doesn't matter the size. So I'm gonna do employees first because retention is on everybody's mind. We lose people every day. Forget millennials, let's talk Gen Alpha, okay? They watch you very, very closely. They watch your board, they watch your officers, they watch your supervisors. And if you are not reflecting, what they think is important, they're gonna leave you in a heartbeat because they've got another job somewhere. So retaining employees is, I think, one of the most important things. And Manori mentioned we're minority certified. Most of our clients are either, because they're South Asian owned, they're either minority certified or they're women owned. Well, if you're minority certified, but then you have an all male management, so that you are not reflecting that diversity that you are making money on by being minority certified. So you promote, attending GMSDC conference and, filling out all the RFIs, and you're so proud of that, but then your leadership and your, what you do every day doesn't reflect that certification, they will see right through that. So forget about what's right or wrong. We can talk about what's right or wrong, but just keeping your employees engaged and proud of you as a company and proud of you as a company owner is a good enough reason. I will let someone else speak to the fact that you make more money when you're, because there's so many different ways. I mean, Chloe and Cecily covered them so well, but you absolutely make more money because you think differently, you have different markets that you can approach, you have an advisory board that reaches into different parts of the community. So there's no question about it. We see our clients as well, which are mostly small and mid-sized companies, flourish when they open up their companies and bring in other folks.
Thank you for that. I think that's very insightful. We don't necessarily need to quote statistics. I think, Chloe, you already put up some numbers about the return on investment that comes from diversity. And I think you've covered that, Sonjui. Many of the employee issues crop up if they don't see a diverse workforce. Now, can we delve a little bit more into our topic today is how to build a diverse advisory board. So from a leadership level, do you want to just talk a bit, Sonjui, about how you can actually build and find leaders that are diverse? What do you encourage companies to do to try and find those diverse people to come on board?
I hope I don't offend anyone, but if you are only going to look for your board at your golf course and your golf club, you will find people that look just like you, okay? So not the place to start. So if it is important to you, if what we say today convinces you that this is a way to expand your customer base, keep your employees happy and increase your revenues, look outside of the places you already are. Expand beyond it, and also look, who are your customers? If your customer are the Fortune 500, and Chloe and Cecily have already told you that it's important to them what your company looks like, then who is important to that customer? Who's important to Home Depot? Who's important to Accenture? Who's important to Coke? So I would start with the understanding your customer and your clients and what they're looking for. There are lots and lots of places to find the right people. I mean, if you're an accounting firm, there's like the National Black Accountants. Yeah, there's one for Black MBAs. There's one, So NAMWolf, which is kind of, a name, but NAMWolf is minority and women-owned law firm, so that big companies, Fortune 500 companies, can come to an organization and find law firms that are owned by minority and women-owned business law firms. So, there are places you can find the people that you need and the advisory board that you need. One, you have to know who you're looking for, know who to ask where to find them, and get out of wherever you are right now and go to a new space.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'd just like to add to that. Companies talk. Just keep that in mind. We are in the same circles. We've built relationships. So we share suppliers. We talk. So if there's a supplier that we're having problems with, that we're saying, hey, they're not reflective of who they say they are, that's the same conversation I'm sitting down with other Fortune 500s having at conferences. We share information, the good, the bad, otherwise. So just also keep that in mind. It's not exclusive to just what's happening with one client. So if you're trying to get in the door at other places, know that, the word travels. It's a very small community.
Thank you. Go ahead, Noelle.
And I like how Sonjui was talking about thinking about your customers and making sure that your board is reflective of your customers, but not necessarily even the customers that you have today, but the customers that you want to have in the future. The stat on your slides around 70% increase in purchasing power, that's huge. And so thinking about, does my board reflect who I want my future customer to look like? There are a number of organizations that are out there. I'm on an advisory group of a organization called 50/50 Women on Board. We just put out a publication on 50 women to watch that want to step on boards, and these are, women from underrepresented backgrounds as well. So those are women that are primed and trained and ready to serve on boards right now. So that's an organization to look at. On Board is another one that does a really good job. So the information's out there. There are people that are ready to step on those boards. The other thing that I would just say of why I think in particular it's important to have representation at the leadership and at the board level is that when you also think about kind of the history of diversity, equity, and inclusion reporting, this is not new. This is stuff that's been around since EEOC 1 report started going out in the 1960s asking for some of those data points. And so this isn't new, but there's always been this kind of, if I'm putting out DEI data, it's from a kind of reactive standpoint, it's from a compliance view. I'm putting out a report that's saying, this is what I did last year. That type of reporting and that type of use of DEI data doesn't mean that we're actually using that data to think forward and push forward. And so I think that there's this thinking within HR departments in this fear sometimes of looking at data. And data is important not just for this is what our organization looks like, but let's start looking at what's actually working within the organization. So the only person that can remove that and give permission to an HR leader to say, hey, this is important, we care, we want to see this, that comes from the board. And so if you can have the board asking for, you have the representation on the board because those board members have probably dealt with how they got to be in the part of their career where they're sitting on boards. But if that permission is coming from the board, that really unlocks the ability for organizations to do a whole lot more, because you're saying, do it because the board wants to see it.
That's a great point, Noelle. And people shouldn't forget the effect of your website, because not every rank and file employee is going to be on a website, but the board usually is. And employees and applicants make decisions based on what they see. I applied to my first law firm in London because the chairwoman was the first female chair of a London law firm. And there are places I didn't apply to because there was nobody that looked like me on the website. So, think about what you're projecting when you choose your board. Who are you putting out on your website? So on that same point, really, there obviously are going to be challenges. Can either of you talk to any challenges that you've seen, or any of us talk about any particular challenges you've seen to finding a diverse board? Have you encountered any challenges, barriers?
I think the biggest challenge is admitting that you need to do that. I mean, I think it's because there are lots of qualified people out there, and there's lots of people in your industry, and we're graduating women and minorities by large numbers. But I think one of the challenges is what people will recognize, just the tokenism and quota mentality. And if you get into a tokenism and a quota mentality, that also is very visible. And so, you don't want to have like the one, and then when that person rolls off, then you get another, so I would avoid that.
Yeah. I think that the number one thing that we continue to see, and I'm not just saying this because we have a data insights company, when you look at the recommendations of what do we need, the number one recommendation is always data. And I think part of it is, I think that a big challenge is that, only 23% of HR leaders think that these programs are working today. That's not a good statistic, but a lot of the reason, our hypothesis, is because we've never had the data to actually understand what does work. So because we haven't been tracking this data, we've been kind of keeping this data within organizations, saying like, I'm just gonna look at my own data and I'm not sharing it with anybody else because I'm scared. That means that we're not learning about what's actually working and driving results. And so if we can actually get to a place of unlocking this is what works, I think that does us all and gets us all a whole lot further.
And I would just say, just understand the direction that you want your company to go into. I think at the end of the day, as business owners, business leaders, 70% of revenue growth, I think everybody I could go for a 70% increase in salary. I think that speaks volumes. The bottom line, business, you're in business to make money. You may have a passion for it, but you're not doing it for free. If you have a future, if you're looking futuristically toward opportunity for your company, your organization, then it just it makes sense. Fiscally, if nothing else, it fiscally makes sense. You look at communities and how we're in Atlanta. This is probably one of the biggest melting pots in the world. So it's kind of, sometimes it's baffling to understand how someone could have a board that is not diverse of this community overall. Going back to Noelle, there are plenty of opportunities to select. The most common statement is, I can't find anybody. I don't know where most people are looking. I run into people all the time. I sit on a board, so I know there are more than qualified individuals that are out there. And it's always, I think the most uncomfortable thing is to be in a room with someone that doesn't look like yourself, but you will find that you have more in common than you do have differences. I think we've all experienced that. So when you bring that mindset to your organization, you bring innovation, you bring opportunity, you bring a lot of things that you probably would have never thought of. And I think that definitely makes you more forward thinking and very reflective of where you want to go.
Thank you. So how are we for time? Okay, 5 more minutes. So I guess let's cut to the chase then. So I'd like to hear from Sonjui and Noelle. Can you tell each of you, give one or two big no-nos, for those of you who want to take on board making things more inclusive, what would you say as a couple of tips on that point? Do you want to go ahead, Noelle?
Yeah, so I would say if you look at the data right now, most organizations are turning over their DEI leader about every 24 months. It's the highest turnover C-suite position today. Big part of the reason for that is because they're not resourced with the tools and resources to actually be able to do the work, and are getting burned out because what organizations unfortunately have done is created a single point of failure. And so they put one person in the role, put everything on their shoulders, gave them no resources, and said, why didn't the numbers change? I think what we've got to quit doing is putting this responsibility on one person. This has got to come from the CEO. We ran a campaign recently to 800 different CEOs saying, hey, push this down to your people team because this comes from you. Got one of the world's largest beer companies CEOs responding and saying, I'm not going to do your job for you. This is a CEO's job. This is leadership's job. This is not a DEI leader's job. And so putting it on hiring a DEI manager to say you have a DEI manager and setting them up for failure is also not the way to go about doing it. So I think it's got to be woven throughout the culture of your company, and it's got to come from you emphasizing and incentivizing your entire team to do this work. So I would say that's the big thing, is we've got to get away from thinking we hire one person in the role and we're solving it, because it's not working.
Yeah, and how often is that person woman and a woman of color? You know, it's like you put the person that was the hardest to get to her job, and you put her in charge of, getting everybody else in the room. I think I've already talked about all the no-nos, the quota, the tokenism, walk the walk. I think I just want to emphasize that you want to look like what you are trying to do. And so if you can't, the biggest mistake, I think, is just saying it and then not doing it. Saying that you're, you are minority certified or you're women owned and you want to, live that value, but then not living it, because people see through that, your customers see through it, your employees see through it, and then your senior leadership sees through it. So I think that's the biggest one.
Just one more thing. I know I was just saying no-nos. I think the biggest no-no is not doing anything, because you're scared to not do anything, and I think that we'll get to a place where we can do this later on. This is a future problem. I think that is, I apologize, I want to retract my statement. I hope that the other one was still a good lesson learned. But I really think that the biggest no-no is just not doing anything because you don't know how. Doing something is better than not doing anything.
Hallelujah, I agree with that. That's a great statement, because I think a lot of us are just watching around and seeing that this is becoming more important, but you have to take the first step. And one step is okay, and there are resources like your company, Noelle. And I would really encourage all of you to go and have a look on her website, because I read some astounding statistics. I think you said that something like there's an average of 16 different applications that the average HR team is using, but they don't have a grasp of what the data means. They're using all these apps just to say we've got all of this data, but they don't know what it is, and it's all just noise.
Which means that they're solving for the wrong problem.
Manori, I didn't want you to forget the question about how DE&I is on the front lines right now.
Well, yes.
You were excited about that one. I'm letting you take it.
We weren't sure if anybody would mention this, but obviously it's quite controversial at the moment. People have very strong opinions, differing opinions on how far diversity and inclusion should go. And I know that Sonjui said she had no problem talking about that. So,
well, I think what I would say is that it's kind of a political issue right now. I don't think it's affecting corporations. I think corporations have come around to this idea. They know the right thing to do, and they're gonna stay on their path. I think right now it's just a political issue to sort of, get votes and, get folks in a certain sector. But I don't, Disney is a prime example of just somebody who said, you know, we're going to just do what we're going to do, you know, and we're going to have our Pride Day, and, you know, if you don't like it, then, you know, we'll go into litigation over it. So I think there is a lot of, the corporations aren't backing away from it. So I think where it matters, it's still important.
And the compliance and regulations is continuing to come around it as well.
And on that point, actually, because I think it's 2035 that Gen Z, Gen X, and millennials are going to be the biggest purchasing power block and also the biggest voting block. And you have to, anybody who follows any elections can see how many younger people have been elected to Congress and on a local level. These are people who are going to be making the laws as well. So if you don't want to change, there's going to come a point relatively quickly where the laws are going to be changed by people who just want to push the envelope much further and at a faster pace than it's been going right now. So you can either get ahead of the curve or just be left behind.
Or retire.
Or retire after you've made your money. I don't think we have time for any questions. Or, do we have? Yeah? Okay. Does anybody have a question? We have one over there and one over there. Let's go with you first.
All right.
Sir, you put his hand up first.
Yeah, thank you so much for the topic that you've covered. So we're an early stage startup in financial technology, and I'm originally from Haiti, and I've lived all over the world, and I want to build a diverse team. But early stage companies face this challenge of how do you find the resources to build a diverse board, to build a diverse team. You mentioned some organizations, but I think startups have a special challenge in finding the right candidates. I'd love for you to speak to that.
Sure. It's hard to find the right team at the early stages. I think that some of the ways that, we're early stage 2, we're closing our pre-seed round right now, so we can actually go and bring people on at market now, or right under market now. But I would say that finding the advisors, even if it's not, you're on stage 1, I think putting your own advisors around you that come from different backgrounds, skill sets, as well as different, demographic backgrounds as well. So I think that that's a good place to start. And I do think that there are lots of places to find those people. I'm happy to talk about that. In terms of your overall team, it's something that was absolutely a factor in every candidate that's come our direction as well. So I'm very proud that we do have a very diverse team. But it might take longer, but I know that it's the right thing at the end of the day. There's also, just if you're early stage, and I'm glad you're asking that, because I think the whole point is, if you're actually asking these questions now, you're going to be in such a better place later on, because there are so many companies that they don't want to talk to us till they're starting to think about exit, because they know they're going to have to go through diligence, and this is all going to come out, and it's going to be a problem for them on their valuations, which is, again, talk about business case for why you invest in this. But I think that if you're doing it right now, it might take longer and it might be harder, but it means that you're building your founding team with representation, and they're going to bring their networks to the table. And so you're building this from the very beginning, and it's not something that you're going back and trying to fix later on. We also have incredibly diverse talent coming out of our universities in Atlanta, and so there are some fantastic potential interns that are in this city. And so I think, think about that too. Like the Georgia State students, I'm not advocating for anyone in particular, but like the Georgia State students, they're really good for entrepreneurship, like super.
In our HBCUs. I mean, we are the city of HBCUs.
Yeah, absolutely. That have intern programs coming out of Morehouse and Spelman. So, yeah, I think that and Georgia State has a lot of first-generation students as well. So, yeah, I think those are some of the ways to do that. Yeah.
So, thank you. Spectacularly spoken. Like, seriously, some of the anecdotes you guys gave, the examples you gave, the definition of DE&I, it's perfect. So, my name is Gopal. I am in the TiE board in Atlanta. one question I have for you, which kind of follows up to the gentleman's question, is for early stage companies, it makes total sense. Like your company should look like your customers, and because you think like that, it all makes sense. My question to you is, how do you go about it? Like my company is like maybe 24 people right now, and this is the time I need to start thinking about it. How do I go about? Where do I start? Is there a statistics that I run? Is there a process I follow?
Well, I think, so it has to be intentional, so that's the first step. And I think you have to do an application process that's wide. So if you're used to just hiring in one university or out of one program, or, we do this, we go to our alma mater, we go to, we talk about it amongst our friends, so I think you have to go to the places where you are not. Just like go to different places, go to GSU, go to the HBCUs, and you'll find the top talent. So no one's telling you to be, less selective or hire someone who's not right for you. Still, you want to find the right person, but look in a different place.
And I would just say, so if for you all that are SMBs, you actually have to start reporting on this to the federal government when you're 100 employees. Like it's required every single year. You'll get fined pretty heavily if you don't. So it's something that you have to do. So I think you're doing the right thing by starting to ask those questions now. There's also some things where like HR tools that you might be using, they have a default setting where they'll actually start looking at this type of data when you're about that 100 mark. But the thing is most of those tools can start tracking this data for you now. You just have to ask your representative. So I think starting to think about, look at it. If you're at 24 people, like you've probably been growing pretty fast and might not have a pulse on, hey, what does my organization look like other than anecdotally? So starting to put those systems into place now. And again, I think just getting an understanding of this is what my organization looks like. Maybe age, we could, diversify on age, maybe on some other things. And that at least gives you the baseline so that you know where, you want to go beyond your network and how you want to bring more representation into your organization. And inclusion, not just representation, but making sure that they're staying. Yeah, they belong.
And I would also just like to add to that, I would say for both, consider internships. I mean, that's probably a great way to, get someone's feet wet in an industry that a small business that maybe they don't know much about. But internships, I don't know a college student yet that's not looking for an internship. So, and some are willing to do it unpaid, but I think that's also a great way to, to get word of mouth out there about your business. A great internship goes a long way.
Thank you very much. And I think we're going to wrap up in a minute. I just would say there are many people. Oh, we have one more question.
It's over here.
Okay, they have the mic.
What would be the best advice that you guys would give for integration in your current culture? So if you have 40, 60 employees that you've kind of hired over the years that are a certain culture, a certain fit, because that's what we were trained to think, and now we're trying to bring in a totally different viewpoint, how do I integrate that with my employees easily and say, hey, I know this is going to feel different because we're kind of all the same, but this is really important for us?
Are you surveying them right now?
Say that again?
Are you surveying?
No, actually.
Yeah, start there.
Okay.
And I would say, so I'm head of the employment team at Taylor English, and we provide diversity training as part of our packages to clients. And I will say one thing that you have to understand is you can get people to sit in a room and be talked at for diversity training, but it comes from the top up. Top down, I mean, if the CEO isn't there at the training and doesn't show that this training is important to the company, if he just tells the rank and file, you've all got to go to diversity training, nobody's going to take it seriously. So it has to come from leadership that they say this matters and this is why it matters. So I think from a messaging perspective, you have to figure out how leadership is going to convey why are we doing this training, why do we believe diversity is important, and get that message internally at the highest levels sorted out.
Just practically, there are some great facilitators in Atlanta. I mean, there are coaches that just focus on this. And they spend time with you to get to know you, and then what is the easiest way to make this a priority. Sometimes it goes back to just reminding people, where everybody came from, and how did we end up in a situation where our company looks like this, and why we think it's important to change it. But there's fabulous coaches that will help you with that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Redefining your values and your behaviors, it's probably a really good inflection point to go back and revisit that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause.